Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or soon, good morning. This is Eagle Eyes on Tech. I am Eagle Falcon. Alright. We got quite a lot of interesting stuff to cover, including a nice, comprehensive guide about picking graphic cards, being able to tell the difference between a 1060, a 960, what all those numbers mean. We got that towards the end of the program today. I want to start, though, with a bit of political news. I'm going to warn you ahead of time. It's going to cover like the first 10 to 20 minutes of it. So, I mean, those of you listening to the pre-recorded podcast totally understand why you would go ahead and just skip past it, because I know it's going to be a dirty subject. But those of you who are Discord users, I encourage you to at least listen to the first of these two stories. Alright? What we're going to talk about is a little piece done by NBC. And granted, this piece is a little old. And by a little old, I mean it came out Monday. But it's already made quite a bit of controversy within the tech and gaming community. And we're going to play it, and I'm going to interrupt as I deem fit to comment on it. The title of the video can be found on YouTube, called How Gamers Are Facilitating the Rise of the Alt-Right. Think NBC News. One of the most important things I want to point out about this is that this is from NBC News, the core NBC News, not MSNBC, the hard left wing of NBC News. No, this is from NBC News. Let's start, shall we?
Before white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and white nationalists marched in Charlottesville, Virginia in August, they were organizing behind a computer screen. And a lot of that organizing happened through a messaging service called Discord, which was a
Discord. Oh boy, NBC. Let's just gonna start right there, huh? We're just going to immediately blame Discord for riots by a bunch of idiots in Charlottesville, huh? First off, I love the fact this article comes 2 months after the riots. 2 months after the riots, and you're just going to go ahead and just drag Discord and gamers into it. Okay, let's continue.
Was originally created to connect video game players to one another. This is just the latest in the long-running shared history between the gaming community and the alt-right.
Long-running history between the gaming community and the alt-right. Now, come on. Now, of course, my argument has to be more than just come on, but seriously. How can there be a long-running history when the alt-right didn't really start existing until, I don't know, 3 years ago? Gamers have existed for an absurdly long time. Even before the day and the era of computer gaming, video gaming. Jeez. Alright, let's continue. Let's see how gamers, the most notoriously apolitical group in all of existence, is connected to the fringiest right-wing group in existence that is so right-wing, even the right wing doesn't want to deal with it. The title card they're showing right now that you can't see says, Connecting the Dots, Gamers of the Alt-Right. You already know just from that, this is just going to be nothing but tinfoil hat level nonsense. But let's continue.
Gaming culture has always been racist, it's always been sexist, but the internet has sort of allowed us to just sort of see what has always been there.
Always been racist, always been sexist. Are really? Really? It's always been racist and always been sexist. How? They just declare this. A community that begs, underline begs, for a strong female hero in as many games as possible. We're gonna play the sexist card, huh? Now, racist... Seriously? Really? We're just going to brand all of gaming as racist? The only way you can do that is by saying, oh, there's not enough of this, that, or the other race in games. But come on. On top of that, it's just more declarations. There's no reasoning behind any of these accusations. They just declare all of gaming sexist and racist.
Vossen is a PhD candidate studying how sexism seeded in gaming is replicated in the real world. Her study is based on Gamergate, a movement that began with intimidating and harassing female video game journalists under the guise of fairness in video game journalism.
We're gonna cite Gamergate as the reason why all of gaming is sexist. Gamergate, where a bunch of journalists got a hold of news of a bad breakup and then overreacted, and then, understandably so, everyone else started absolutely thrashing all the journalists who exploded the whole thing in the first place because they called... Like, you do realize what Gamergate is, right? Journalists get wrong information, accuse all gamers of being sexist, and all gamers go back at the journalists saying, no, we're not. Stop calling us things. This is just a new level of absurd. But let's continue.
Harassment quickly gained traction. It helped catalyze the alt-right movement, which secured power and prominence during the 2016 election cycle.
Gamergate happened 2 years before the alt-right began rising on the 4chan poll. Like, straight up. But let's continue.
When you were studying Gamergate and you were really looking at the techniques that they use, it's impossible not to see the same techniques being used by Trump supporters.
The pictures they're using are of the poll 4chan trolls and the various memes they posted on 4chan. But we're still trying to pin this on Discord, trying to brand all Discord users as the equivalent of the absolute terrible trolls of the poll board on 4chan. I have never seen any piece of news that had less research done than this one. But let's continue.
According to Vossen, the gamers and the alt-right share common ground.
As people who are marginalized are fighting for equality, those who've traditionally had privilege, especially white men, feel that they are being oppressed by these people who are trying to just be treated as equal.
Why do you hate black people? African Americans.
What do you even say? It's once again taking one incident and painting everyone under this.
dirty, they're stingy, and they're just gross.
Xbox Live and PlayStation Network both allow players to chat live while gaming. They have become havens for hate speech against women and minorities.
Have you actually been in the majority of voice chats? The overwhelming majority of voice chats are go up top, take down the Mercy first, I need heals, and 99% of the time, the moment a troll tries to bring up any sort of racist speech of the such, everyone keeps scrambling to try and immediately kick them out of the voice chat. To say that Discord, Xbox Live, and PlayStation voice chat is a haven for hate speech is absurd. You're just as likely to say that walking on the street is a haven for hate speech, or snail mail is a haven for hate speech, or email, or anything. By this logic, all forms of communication are havens for hate speech. I don't even want to go through the rest of this. It's just such a bad, twisted piece of... I'm not even going to call it news. It's propaganda. Citing minimalist facts, and the ones they do can be debunked in an instant by anyone who's even spent a day on an actual game or on any of these services they're trying to paint as an instrumental tool of what they're going to call the alt-right. I'm going to call the poltards on 4chan, because that's all the alt-right is. A bunch of moronic trolls. But let's continue.
I had noticed and witnessed was what I call like linguistic profiling, like just based on how somebody sounds, you know, they kind of lash out in like very like inappropriate ways.
Who votes for Mission? They allow girls to play Call of Duty in America?
Wow, they allow morons to play Call of Duty in America?
Not everyone in the gaming community is sexist or racist. We are having this sort of internal cultural problem with.
Alright, so, anyone who has actually been in a video game knows what that is. It's called trolling. They're not... Do I really have to explain this? They do it to get a reaction. This is literally 4 minutes of propaganda that feeds into the NBC's little narrative that gamers are alt-right racists, and then feeds the alt-right racist trolls who then start this in the first place. This entire article, this piece of propaganda, is literally the exact opposite of helping. Literally the exact opposite.
Sexist and racist gamers.
So, what happens when these behaviors move from the gaming world to the real world? Keegan Hanks studies the progression of the alt-right on the web.
Discord, as a platform, kind of had a meteoric rise in the alt-right. You know, I think many of the members of...
It had about as much of a purpose as 4chan did, I mean, or Reddit. Like, once again, because Discord's new, we just need to absolutely paint Discord as this absolute tool. But the part I really want to get to is up ahead.
Of the alt-right were actually aware of it because they were also members of the video game community. Many of them are. Discord became almost a requirement for a lot of these people if you wanted to be actively involved in the movement.
Discord is a...
It didn't, by the way. Spoiler alert, because it takes all of 30 seconds to research this, use of 4chan and Reddit on the various boards are required. Discord's just a convenient way to get into each other instantly. Just because that's the new hot platform. It's the new Skype.
Anonymous and lightly monitored, whiwhich allowed the alt-right to control communications and access for thousands of users. Some Discord servers controlled by alt-right leaders made users post pictures of their Caucasian skin in order to participate. This allowed the alt-right to centralize its message and disseminate information around the Charlottesville rallies.
But once again, it's more declarations with... No, I don't doubt it. I would not doubt a bunch of neo-Nazis actually requiring you to post pics. That doesn't surprise me at all, but come on.
Discord service played a substantial role in fomenting the riots that led to the death of Heather Heyer. After facing pressure, Discord shut down the servers used to organize in Charlottesville. The company stated, "We will continue to take action against white supremacy, Nazi ideology, and all forms of hate." Perhaps...
What pressure? Literally, what pressure? Discord literally did that 2 hours after the incident. Now, normally, the way these sort of things go, if you don't know how these sort of messenger services work, if anything's found that does violate their terms of service, which, if what NBC is accusing these alt-right servers of doing, would be against the Discord terms of services, they would just be shut down silently. Discord probably has been shutting these down since the dawn of time, but because this incident came out, they immediately went public saying we're doing this as what is known as virtue signaling. To say that they did this under pressure is absurd. That's the part I wanted to get to. Was the fact they're trying to claim that there was pressure for Discord to do this. There was no pressure. But of course, this whole thing is that, oh no, gamers are bad. Gamers are so bad. Oh, no. All gamers are terrible. Let me ask you something, NBC. Have you ever talked to a gamer that wasn't a frequent user of 4chan? Have you gone on Twitch and talked to streamers? Have you seen any of the good that gamers have? QPZ in our Twitch chat right now brings up that exact same point. It's too bad they don't mention any instance where gamers have come together to raise money for charities. Yeah, you know, like Games Done Quick, which raises 5 to 6 digits of dollars for charities at least twice a year. But no, all gamers have to be bad. And then you wonder why the meme fake news gets spread around. It's because of pieces like this. $75,523 views. 282 likes. 22,000 dislikes. That is the only high note about this article. Literally, the only highlight. The fact that the dislikes are so overwhelmingly higher than the dislikes show that this piece is literally convincing no one. Except for the 282 either employees of NBC or absolute believers that gamers are all terrible. Which, if you're really going to believe a hit piece like this, you might actually be beyond hope, and that's just kind of sad. But let's move on from that, because we need to move on to happier things. Unfortunately, I have this other piece to talk about, the other piece of political news that happened over the week. And yeah, I'll just be super quick with this one. Facebook, Google, and Twitter testify before Congress. They say that Russians have interfered heavily on their platforms, and the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee says that they have a role to stop this sort of stuff. I'll just be real quick, I disagree. Not because I'm pro-Russian propaganda, but because there literally is an amendment to the Constitution, the very first one, that says that the people have a right to free speech. Literally, its sole purpose in the world that the government cannot force to silence speech. I mean, if Facebook, Twitter, and Google want to let that stuff go around, by all means, do it. But it should be their call, not the Senate's. So if Google, Facebook, and Twitter want to do it, want to silence that, by all means, go ahead. But to be ordered by the Senate subcommittee to do it, I have a serious problem with that. I really do. All right, let's move on to anything better. Like literally anything better. How about the GTX 1070 Ti? That sounds like something better. The reviews are in. All right, the GTX 1070 Ti is a graphic card that sits between the 1060 and the 1080. Or I'm sorry, not the 1070 and the 1080 and the 1080. Now, on its specs, it basically looks exactly like the 1080, but slightly tuned down. And that pretty much is what it is. It performs very similarly to the 1080. To the point where it's almost the exact same. And it's $50 cheaper than the 1080. So you can get 1080 performance for $50 less. The only problem is that the pricing is completely out of whack right now. Almost all cards are more expensive between the A, RAM shortages going around, and B, and more importantly, the cryptocurrency mining craze that's going around. Because of that, this whole price scheme of $500 for the 1080, $450 for the 1070 Ti, and the $400 for the 1070, it's not going to happen. So, what do I think? I think the fact that this card exists means that we are not going to see the GeForce GTX 1100 series anytime soon. It's probably not going to come out this year. So if you are, in fact, in the market to grab a graphic card, go ahead and just grab it. It's going to be a couple months before we start seeing the 1100s. If you can wait, it's always better to wait. But we're approaching the holiday season. A lot of stuff's going to be going on sale. So if you hunt down hard enough, you can probably find a pretty good deal. I, of course, will be doing some research of my own to try and find the best graphic cards, computer parts, etc., etc., etc. And I will be posting any of that on my Twitch page at twitch.tv/eagle_falcon. It'll be in a small little panel under the broadcast in what's called Eagles Picks. It's just a little bit of sellout going there. Just a little. But I assure you, they are the exact parts I would buy. It's not going to be whoever paid me the most, which, spoiler alert, nobody pays me anything. So, we're going to move on to the Advanced Protection Program by Google. What is the Advanced Protection Plan? Or program, I should say, not plan. Have you ever heard of two-factor authentication? Two-factor authentication is when you punch in a password, you then have a second form of identification, usually the server texting you a code, and then you insert that code. For example, when I sign into Twitch, because I am a Twitch affiliate, I need what's called two-factor authentication. I need my password, and then afterwards, Twitch then texts me a code, which changes every time, that I have to enter in order to authenticate anything. And that's so that no twit can go around and say Eagle's a poop head on his Twitch page. That'd be bad. And also childish. The Advanced Protection Program is Google adding a third factor. In order to access your Gmail, if you apply to this program, you can A, then put in your password. B, then a code will be texted to you. That's your second factor authentication. And then your third factor, C, is what this thing provides. A device that looks like a USB thumb drive that has to be plugged into the computer to then unlock the email. This is for either A, the ultra paranoid, or B, professional users who are still using Gmail. Some outlets have said this is also for politicians, but come on. No politician uses Gmail. Unless they're really still... Okay, there actually are probably a lot of politicians that use Gmail. I just answered my own question. So that you can now apply to this program if you are super duper paranoid about your Gmail account being hacked into. It is $20 for the USB key. I believe that also gets you a second one as a spare in case you lose the first so you're not permanently locked out. If you are this level of paranoid, I would recommend keeping that spare key inside a lockbox. You know. So that no one can just grab your spare key and get access to your email and see whatever scandalous things you're storing on your Gmail. Which Google can see. And constantly looks at that to target you with ads. Which is why using Gmail for anything that secure is not a good idea. By the way. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, I have the comprehensive guide of how to identify graphic cards, as well as a look at the 8th generation Intel processors, and Apple categorizing your pictures by breast size. We'll be right back. Hey everyone, Eagle Falcon here. Normally I take this time to talk about how you can support the podcast and how we don't have any advertisers, it's all supported by you, and blah 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 blah. Which, by the way, still can do, twitch.tv/eagle_falcon, cheer, subscribe, and whatnot. All of that supports the podcast. But we are going to be changing things up in the near future. We are working right now on a website that is going to be the home of Eagle Eyes on Tech, including a built-in player that'll play the live broadcasts of Eagle Eyes on Tech when they happen, in addition to kind of revamping the supporting us system. Right now we just go by support the Eagle Falcon Twitch stream. And you can still do that, of course. That still supports me and the podcast. But we kind of want to have a bit of a separation. So we're going to be switching to Patreon. We're going to be trying to incorporate some more incentives for that. And we're going to see how it goes. But the main reason is so that there is one central location for the podcast, including an embedded player. It's just going to look better than just having the face of Eagle Eyes on Tech just be the Spreaker page, which in the end is nice and all, but going to Spreaker.com/ whatever the heck it is, I don't even know what it is off the top of my head. It's nowhere near as smooth as, say, going to EagleEyesOnTech.com, which, no, don't. Not officially a website yet. I haven't even decided on the domain name. That's all going to be coming down the pike. It's going to be about a few months out of the way. The point is that this is to tell you what our plan is, and if you want to support, you can still do it at twitch.tv/eagle_falcon. Thank you for the support, and that concludes this little message/rant, disguised as an ad, but not really an ad. I don't even know what this was. Oh well, bye. Welcome back, Eagle Eyes on Tech. I'm Eagle Falcon. Alright. I'm not sure how far down the road that website thing is going to be quite honest. I'm having a hard time finding the free time to do it, But hopefully within a month. Anyway. The 8th generation Intel processors are starting to make their way through all the various channels. We're finally starting to see them inside laptops, although it's just what's called the Kaby Lake refresh, not the actual... What is it now? Coffee Lake? Cannon Lake? I don't know. And for the most part, the only real thing of note here is the fact that the performance is noticeably better. To the tune of almost an 80% performance increase on the Cinebenchmarks. On Handbrake, we're talking... not too much. In fact, actually, Handbrake actually performs better on the old CPU, which is kind of odd. And on PC Mark, we're getting roughly a 20% performance increase. Maybe about 10. Which, kind of makes some sense. Seeing as how Cinebench is a multi-core based benchmarking tool, Handbrake and PC Mark are not. They base on single cores. The biggest update, if you don't know, between the 8th generation ultra-low voltage processors and the 7th generation ones is that the new generations are quad-core for the first time. So that means that all those thin as heck laptops are rocking 4 cores instead of 2. Now, does this mean that these are actually gaming capable machines? Not really, no. As much as we'd like to pretend that on your new MacBook Air S computer, you can go ahead and play Call of Duty World War II or whatever the heck the newest game is, it's not really gonna happen. Now, maybe the Cannon Lake parts will. Because, remember, we're talking about, quote, the Kaby Lake refresh parts, which are still 8th generation. Which might, in fact, make this the period, most period, confusing period, release period, ever period. But Intel went and did it anyway. Just when you think you understand something, they just go ahead and just ruin it. And if you're a frequent listener, you know that's my biggest gripe with AMD. The fact that you think you understand their numbering system, and then they just go and release the Radeon Vega and throw the entire numbering system to the wind. Just whatever, who cares? That being said, let's actually go over real quick a comprehensive guide as to how the various graphic cards work. Alright, the processors, it's kind of easy to tell. With Intel, it starts at Celeron, then a Pentium is stronger than a Celeron, a Core i3 is better than a Pentium. Actually, wait, no, there's the Core M's in there. M5 is better than M3, M7 is better than an M5, i3 is better than an M7, i5 is better than an i3, i7 is better than an i5, i9 is better than an i7. You know, the bigger the number, the better it is. And if it has an M in it, it's automatically terrible. That's basically how it goes. I mean, sorry, fans of the Core M series, but your processor is bad. Its sole purpose in life is to sip power at the cost of doing anything. The thing is that the graphic cards throw a bunch of numbers in there. Instead of it just being a convenient i9, i7, i5, i3 kind of scheme, you have a lot of numbers. Like, there's a GTX 980, but there's also a 1050. But is a 1050 better than a 980? The answer is no. But why? One is a bigger number. It's because the number is actually broken down into segments. In the NVIDIA world, there might as well be a hyphen in the middle of the number. The first digit determines the generation. So, for example, a GTX 980, the 9 is the generation. That's the 9th generation graphic card. With a GTX 1080, the 10 is the generation. The next graphic cards that are going to come out are, unless NVIDIA makes me a liar, going to be the GTX 1100 series. So what does the digit after that mean? The 30s, the 40s, the 50s, etc., etc., etc. That is the class of graphic card, or the power behind it. So that second to last digit determines the power of the graphic card. An X10 being the lowest, usually just for providing a little bit of extra graphic horsepower to play movies, and 80 usually being the highest. Sometimes you have a 90, which is a monstrous graphic card that has 2 GPU chips on it, but you're almost never going to see that anymore. I think NVIDIA is pretty... I don't think we're ever going to see a GTX 1090 or an 1190 ever again. I have a feeling those days are done. Alright, so... For example, in the NVIDIA 10 series, which is the current generation at this time of graphic card, at the bottom tier we have the GeForce GT 1030. That is the lowest end graphic card there is currently on the modern form factor. And you can tell by its specs, which granted there's a lot of numbers to dig through, that it's not all that powerful of a graphic card. You're only talking... What's its core count? Trying to look at my giant chart here. You're only talking 384 CUDA cores. Which that sounds like a lot compared to a CPU. Like, a lot. But in the GPU world, that's not a lot at all. In fact, a better way to tell how much power it has in it is its TDP, which is the wattage it consumes. The GT 1030 is a 30-watt card. Just by that alone, it's basically enough to just play like a 4K movie. It's not going to really game all that well unless you're doing like World of Warcraft or something really low end. But then you look at the next step up. And the next step up in this case is the GTX 1050. That is a 75-watt TDP. 75-watt TDP is actually a very important number to know. Most computers, with very few exceptions, limit the amount of watts that the PCI Express slot can take to 75 watts. So that means the GTX 1050 can go into any normal computer. The only real exception is a lot of the business class small form factor computers. Those, for whatever reason, Dell and HP both do this, and I wish they'd stop, limit those to 25 watts. Some of the newer ones limit it to 30, but it's almost safe to assume it's 25 watts. Now, at the same time of assuming that, always do some research, though, and look to see what the power limitation is on the CPU slot. For example, I was helping a friend out recently over Discord, which, contrary to NBC, is not a tool of the anyway. Not getting back on that subject. That he was trying to upgrade an HP Elite PC. If you know HP, that's their business line. And I made a terrible choice. I said just slap a GTX 1050 in it. Because you normally can. It wasn't until later when I actually did research and looked through the actual owner's manual of it, deep down in like page 53, I want to say, it showed that the PCI Express slot for the GPU was limited to 25 watts. This limitation guarantees the rig will never be able to game. Or if it will, you're going to be limited to Doom or some really low-end games. You're not going to be able to play any of the real modern games at all. Alright, that covers the GTX 1050. Usually with NVIDIA, whatever the X50 is considered your mainstream card. If you just want to be able to perform and game a bit casually, that's the card to go for because you can slap it into basically anything. That's a regular desktop tower, that is. So what about the 1050 Ti? What do those two little extra letters mean, the Ti? Here's what they mean. Basically, the Ti is a stepgap. It's basically saying this is the GTX 1055. Why don't they call it the GTX 1055? Why do they call it the 1050 Ti? I don't know. But basically just consider the Ti a 5. And as such, it is slightly more powerful than the 1050. The 1050 Ti has more cores, they're at a slightly lower clock speed, they still have a TDP of 75, so it should be able to go into any computer. One important thing to do, though, when you're graphic card shopping, be sure to take a look in the specifications of what the TDP of the card is, because even though the base of the card is, that doesn't mean the one you're buying is the base setup. A lot of manufacturers do what's called factory overclocking. That means they crank up the base clock speed, which also in turn cranks up the wattage required. If the wattage required exceeds 75 watts, this means you're going to find the card requires a 6-pin power supply connector. If you're trying to upgrade, say, a super basic Dell Optiplex desktop, or say an old E-machine, chances are you don't have a 6-pin rail. So keep a sharp eye out for this. Always see pictures of the product. Look to see if it has that 6-pin socket either on the side of the card or on the back of the card. But then you move on to the GTX 1060, a better graphic card, better for higher end gaming. That requires 120 watts. You're guaranteed it's going to require a 6-pin connector. 1070, that's up to 150 watts. Now you're looking into possibly 2 6-pin connectors or an 8-pin. Same thing with the GTX 1070 Ti. I know for a fact that requires an 8-pin. 1080 requires an 8-pin. 1080 Ti I know requires, I want to say 2 8-pins. So always make sure your power supply can handle the power draw and in fact has the connectors to handle it. If your power supply does not have the power adapters, chances are better than not your computer cannot handle the card. You're going to need to scale back. And here's another rule of thumb. Usually as far as NVIDIA goes, the X70 is usually about your above average mark for being able to game. At whatever the 70 equivalent is of the generation, you're going to be able to game on anything at either medium to high settings. If you want to get into the crazy high settings and be a show-off, that's when you want to look at your GTX 1080s. Or X80s, or X80 Ti's, or whatnot. The X being replaced with whatever generation it is. So, that being said, what about the Titans? If you listen to this podcast frequently, you'll hear me rant about how the NVIDIA GeForce Titan cards are basically just... They're basically either just the 1080 or 980 or whatever the generation is, with some minor tweaks and then priced to high heaven. I'm not even kidding. The GeForce GTX 1080, which is considered the best gaming card to get, It costs $700. That's expensive. But the NVIDIA GeForce Titan XP, well, it has a slightly better core count, slightly better base clock, and in turn you'll get about a 10% performance increase. But that card costs $1,200. Here's a spoiler for you. That extra $500, it ain't worth 10%. Not even if you're streaming. It just isn't. No matter how you look at it. So, that's everything to do with desktop GPUs. But now you're probably wondering, my phone's going nuts. Why is my phone going nuts? Oh, it's because I've used too much data on my unlimited plan. Thanks, Sprint. Anyway, you're probably wondering, okay, this one game says I need a GeForce 9900. How does that compare to this numbering scheme? That sounds like it's a card way into the future. How can my game require a card that doesn't exist? It doesn't. Long ago, before GeForce and NVIDIA switched to this newer style of numbering with what's called the GTX series, they had what was called the GE numbers. This was like 8700s, 8800s, 9600s. It was a very similar scheme. But it's basically going like, okay, if your game says it requires a GeForce GE 8700, just about any GeForce card that isn't ancient will work. However, more than likely you're also looking at the minimum requirements. You really should be looking at the recommended. The minimum requirements just means what will it take to run. And trying to play a lot of the fast-paced, Twitch-reliant games, and by Twitch I mean your reflexes, not the streaming service, you really want to be closer to the recommended specs. So let's say, what's a good game off the top of my head? Let's talk about Nier Automata. Those are ones I kind of know off the top of my head. Nier says it required a minimum of a GTX 460. That graphic card's 6 years old. So it'll run on a 460. But that game is very fast-paced, and playing that at only 10 frames a second is not a good idea. You're going to have a bad time. Will this phone please shut up? For the love of God. But its recommended specs requires a GTX 970. And I might be wrong on that. I don't actually have the recommended spec list in front of me, so I can't say. So it requires one of the better cards from last year. So you can safely assume, alright, well if I get a GeForce GTX 1060, or even a 1050, I'm close to the recommended specs on it. So I should be able to game this pretty well, but not at the highest settings. If you want the highest settings, going with a GTX 1070 will make more sense. But going with an older graphic card probably won't. Whenever you're going and actually building a rig for your current gaming desires, going with last year's models, it's not a good idea unless you find like a killer deal. Like, say, for example, you find a GTX 980 for $200 and it works. Why not? You're getting a 1070 equivalent, basically, kinda, sorta, at half the price. The only downside is that it's older and sucks a little bit more power. So what about mobile GPUs? In the NVIDIA world right now, mobile GPUs and desktop GPUs are very close to the same in performance. I'm not even kidding. This used to not be the case. Mobile GPUs used to be half as powerful as the desktop equivalents. A GTX 580M was basically equivalent to a GTX 550. That's no longer the case. The same thing on the AMD side. The only problem is on the AMD side, while they do use a numbering system very similar to NVIDIA, we have the Radeon 520, 530, RX 540, RX 550, RX 560D, RX 560. RX 550D is a step in between the 550 and the 560, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Don't worry about it because it doesn't exist anymore. 560, 570, 580, there is only one big difference. The RX 580 is the equivalent of a 1060. Radeon's power levels, as far as their performance, is way under what NVIDIA's is. And if you take a look at your recommended specs, you'll kind of notice that. If like a game recommends a 1060, you'll notice it says an RX 580 in addition. Now, at the same time, when Radeon releases this 500 series, which is the same architecture as the 400 series, but that's a rant for another day, they also released the Radeon Vega series. You have the RX Vega 56 and the RX Vega 64. As the numbers suggest, the Vega 64 is higher end than the Vega 56. And the Vega 64 is roughly the same power as the 1080. Everybody got that? Anyway, I hope that does help demystify the numbering scheme that is used by the graphics card manufacturers. Because once you understand that the first number is the generation, and that the numbers after that show the grade of GPU it is, you can then get a much better grasp over how powerful a graphic card is, and then you'll know very quickly that a GT 1030 is nowhere near as powerful as a GTX 780. They are in completely different weight classes. So, with that, let's move on to the last burb. Your iPhone can identify cleavage pics. So, here's what happened. Someone went into their Photos app on their iPhone and went to... They just typed in, I assume for funsies, they typed in browsers. or brassiere, or however it's pronounced. I really don't care. They basically typed in cleavage, only to find out that their Photos app did in fact sort their photos based on cleavage. Naturally, this caused a bit of a stir, that their iPhone was smart enough to figure out that those lewd cleavage shots you took were in fact lewd cleavage shots. Now, there is a bit of a bright side to this. All right? Apple has announced out that, yeah, in fact, our Photos app does do this, and it uses machine learning on the computer itself to do the sorting. Concerning the fact that we're in the age of facial recognition, this should surprise no one. All right? But Google also said that their apps can do this too, but it takes the data up to a remote server to do the contemplating and then sends it back to you. So whereas on Apple devices, it's all done in-house on the device, never leaves the device, Google's does in fact leave the device, goes to a server, and comes back, so it can be intercepted if a hacker is desperate enough. What do I think about this? I think that everyone who is surprised like this should not be. This really is nothing other than photo recognition software can in fact sort your pictures on the fly based on whatever you want. Now, I'm sure someone's going to find some word or another that the app has no idea what it means and therefore cannot sort by it. But the fact that it can sort via cleavage should be a surprise to absolutely no one. Thank you, everyone, for listening to the podcast today. I hope you have learned something today. I've been meaning to do the GPU comprehensive guide for a while. And finally this last week gave me a good reason to finally just get to it and just finally do it. And I'm glad I did it. Take care, rest well, and I'll be back next week, Saturday at noon. Bye-bye.